everyone, I'm Gertie and welcome to a new month of Gertie's World on Patreon. I am really thrilled this month to bring you this pattern, which is an expansion on the Stanwyck skirt. So it's the Stanwyck Bodice. So now you can expand the possibilities of the Stanwyck skirt pattern, which by the way, you can already make 81 different skirts with. And now you'll have this beautiful bodice to go with it. And not only that, we are also giving you a collar pattern this month, which you are going to love. It's a removable collar inspired by Wednesday Addams, and it buttons into the neckline of this dress. So that's going to be a separate video because it's its own short little project. So what we're going to be doing today is I'm going to show you how to sew the Stanwyck bodice, and you may notice that I've embellished the ones I have here because for YouTube I did a whole spiderweb tutorial how to do this cording embellishment with the beading. So if you want to do this version with the spider webs, get yourself over to YouTube, watch that tutorial, get yourself to this point where you have the spider web embellishment on the bodice front and the pencil skirt front, and now I'm going to pick it up from there. We're going to sew our bodices and our skirts together to make a Stanwyck dress. So I'm so excited. I'm going to get to show you some of my sort of signature techniques today. So the first thing will be the clean finish at the back neckline with your lining. This is a technique I teach in all of my workshops in person, so now you are getting it on video. So I'm excited to show you that. And I'm also going to show you how to put the pencil skirt together, which I know is a little counterintuitive because it has this pocket stay with these great shaped pockets. The way it goes together isn't totally instinctive, so I'm going to show it to you. We're going to do that. We're going to do the back lapped zipper, and you will have this gorgeous dress with a fully lined bodice, these fabulous pockets, and a beautiful finish on that back zipper. So what I want you to do is get yourself to the point where you have all your darts sewn, okay? And if you have questions about sewing this kind of dart, which has that sort of cut out at the waist and it's slightly curved, I want you to refer back to the picnic top, which we did a couple months ago here on Patreon because it's the exact same type of dart. So take a look at that, and we're also going to be using some of the same techniques to line the bodice to the edge of this cute little cap sleeve here. All right, so get all your darts sewn on your lining and your bodice outer and your skirt back. Sew your shoulder seams on your bodice and your lining. And then I want you to come meet me over at the table where I'm going to show you how to put the lining and the bodice together with that clean finish at the lapped zipper. Let's get started. All right, so I have my bodice outer on the table here, and I just want to show you a few things about it. First of all, as I mentioned, I've sewn my darts and my shoulder seams, and I did have to do some notching rather on the shoulder seams because it's quite a curve right there. So I trimmed it down to about 3/8 of an inch and notched it, pressed those seam allowances open. I also wanted to show you on my version, my entire bodice front is fused, stabilized, and that's just for the embellishment that I did. So if you're not going to be doing any embellishment, don't worry about that. The other thing I want to show you is that I did add some stabilizing tape to my center back opening on my outer bodice on the wrong side. And that's to support the lapped zipper. So I will give you a resource link for this fusible interfacing strips. These are 1.25 inches wide, and a little tip for you guys, you can just make your own if you don't want to order this specialty stay tape is what it's called. You can just cut strips of fusible interfacing that are 1.25 inches wide, apply them to your center back bodice, and that helps your center back zipper opening from stretching out when you insert your zipper. Okay, so that is how far I've gotten on my bodice. I'm gonna put this down here. I've done the same thing with my bodice lining. And I'm making it in this beautiful lavender charmeuse I'm very excited about. I wanted to give you guys a nice contrast here, and I thought it'd be really cute to do the lavender and the pink together. All right, so I have done the same thing where I've done the shoulder seams, I've done all the darts, and I'm ready to go. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start by putting the bodice and the lining together at the neckline. Oh, so many threads. Okay, so I want you to lay out your outer bodice so that the front is towards you. I'm sorry, the back. What I mean is the back should be towards you, all right? So this is my right back, and this is my left back. Now, we're really prepping for the zipper in these next few steps. So I want you to remember that your right back, as you're looking at it, at the right side of the fabric, that is going to be the side for the zipper underlap, okay, on a lap zipper. And the left side is going to be the side with the zipper overlap. So that's the side that gets folded in and top stitched and has like a little overlap for a lap zipper. Okay, so underlap, overlap. All right, the next thing we're going to do is put our lining right sides together with the dress bodice, like that. Okay, so just lay one right on top of the other, right sides together. And now I'm gonna pull this down because what we're gonna be focusing on is just the neckline right now, okay? So you're gonna start by matching your shoulder seams. So make sure they're still pressed open, and put your dress and your lining together at the shoulder seam. Pin them there. Then I'm gonna do the other side. And you can fill in pins in the front later. And what we're really gonna be focusing on right now is this area right here. And what we're doing is what I call a clean finish for a lapped zipper. And the reason for this is if you've ever done a lap zipper, you might know it's my favorite zipper technique. One of the problems with it is that once you put the facing or the lining into your dress, then the lining turns to the inside and covers up your zipper, and you kind of have to do some like weird smushing around to get it to work together. And so this method that I've been developing over the years was inspired by a Threads magazine article that I read many moons ago. And I really love the technique, and I've been sort of developing it ever since. So what we're gonna do is basically working with these back seam allowances here, folding them so that we get a nice clean finish on the inside. On the right side, as you're looking at it, remember this is your underlap side, you're gonna take both seam allowances, and they should be matching perfectly. All right, so you're gonna take both of these seam allowances, and you're gonna turn them together towards you, folded together. I call this nested together because they get folded inside each other like that. Fold them together 1/2 inch. All right, so you can use your little handy dandy clear ruler for this. And then you're just going to put a pin at the top there to hold those together. Okay, you don't have to really press them or anything. You don't have to worry about the seam allowances down here. We're just looking up here at the neckline. All right, on the left side, the overlap side, we are going to do something different, which is we're going to take the lining seam allowance and you're gonna turn it up and towards you 7/8 of an inch. All right, so I'm just gonna check my measurement with my ruler there, and I'm gonna put a pin. All right. Now I'm gonna take the dress and do the same thing, turn it up and towards me. So again, they're nesting inside each other. A really common mistake is to accidentally turn one seam allowance the other way, but we're turning them all up and out towards us. And this one is going to get turned up 5/8 of an inch, okay? So because this one is, the lining is 7/8 of an inch and the dress is 5/8 of an inch, the difference between the two is 1/4 inch. So you should be looking at 1/4 inch gap between those two seam allowances. And to just explain to you why we're doing this, I'm just going to show you really quickly what's going to happen after you sew this and then turn this right side out. You're going to get a nice finished corner right there, like that. And then the lining will form this nice clean finish that will clear the zipper opening. All right, so I know it probably seems fussy, but people who love this like really get into it, like me, and it just creates a really beautiful finish to your dress. So I'm going to repeat those numbers one more time. On the right-hand side, you're going to take both seam allowances, the dress and the lining, and turn them towards you 1/2 inch together. On the left side of the dress, which is the overlap side, you're going to take the lining seam allowance, turn it up and towards you 7/8 of an inch, and the dress seam allowance, do the same thing, up and towards you 5/8 of an inch. So it's going to be wrapped around the lining seam allowance, and you will have 1/4 inch gap between the two. Okay, so that's your clean finish. We've prepped that back opening now. And now you can continue to put pins around the neckline. And we're going to take this over to the machine and sew around the neckline, sewing the two pieces together. And what I want to warn you about is that you're going to be starting right at this edge right here, 5/8 of an inch, okay? You're going to be sewing over the fold, which feels a little weird, but you're going to start right there and you're going to sew all the way around until you get to the other side of the fold and end there, the back stitch. All right, let's go over to the machine. Okay, so we're at the machine and I'm going to take the neckline I just pinned and start stitching at 5/8 of an inch. And remember, you're stitching right at the very edge, which is a fold, which feels a little weird because you're not used to starting to stitch on a fold. So you're going to back stitch all the way to the beginning. You don't want to leave any little gap on the fold or you'll have a hole on the right side of your garment. So watch out for that. And now we're just going to stitch at 5/8 of an inch all the way around. And when you get to the shoulder seams, make sure that your seam allowances stay pressed open. So I'm just checking both of them. And when I come back around to this side, I'm just making sure that my seam allowances stay folded where they're supposed to be. Taking my pins out, and then again, I'm just stitching all the way to the edge of the fold and then back stitching there. Okay, so I've sewn around the entire neckline. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clip across these back corners right here. So just diagonally, I'm going to clip right here. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. All right, and the next thing that you're going to need to do is do a little clip next to your seam allowances on both sides, up to the stitching line, just right there. Same thing on the other side, right next to your seam allowances, to the dress seam allowance. Right there. And that's going to help us turn those seam allowances right side out. The next thing you're going to do is grade your seam allowances. And that means that the lining is going to be trimmed down to about somewhat between, oops, I trimmed them together. I did not mean to do that. The lining should be trimmed down to about
1/8 of an inch, about like that, a little higher than 1/8 of an inch. And then the dress itself gets trimmed to about 1/8 of an inch taller than that. Okay, so I'm going to do that all the way around, trimming the lining very short, so a little taller than 1/8 of an inch. And it's okay if it's not perfectly straight. Cutting the machine with my scissors. All right, and now the dress seam allowance next. Slightly higher. And then the final thing I'm going to do is to clip into my seam allowances around the curves about every 1/2 inch like that. And this will help the neckline lay nice and flat. So remember, you always clip inner curves and notch outer curves. And this is an inner curve, so we're doing a clip about every 1/2 inch. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is turn this right side out. And you can turn those little corners at the back neckline out, so you'll see how you got like a nice clean finish there. And now we're going to understitch the lining. So back into the machine like this, we're going to make sure that our seam allowances are going towards the lining. And with the lining, with the bodice and the lining opened out from each other like this, I'm going to understitch the lining itself. So I'm stitching a little less than 1/8 of an inch away from the seam line. And as you go, you just want to keep opening up those two sides like that, kind of holding it nice and taut. And the other thing you want to make sure is that your seam allowances are underneath your lining here. So they're flipped this way over here. I'm going to stitch all the way around the neckline like this. Okay, and I've just got to the end on the fold of the lining. So there we go. We're all understitched. And if you've watched any of my videos before, you know that the thing I like to do right after understitching is to press. So I'm going to, I like to use a ham for this so I can kind of raise the neckline up slightly. And from the inside of the neckline, I'm just going to kind of push the neckline, the edge outward so that I get a nice crisp edge here. Turn my iron back on. Wait for the iron to heat up. And then I'm going to press on the inside here to get a nice
crisp fold on the neckline. So like that, you can see how that's going to give us a nice clean finish at the neckline. Okay, so I'm going to continue to go around the neckline pressing, and then the next step will be to do the armholes. So we'll go over that flat on the table. So let me just finish this and then I will see you over there. Okay, so you can see that I have sewn around the entire neckline and it's all pressed. And so the next thing we need to do is finish the armholes. So again, this is really similar to the picnic top. So what we're gonna do is, I want you to focus on this sort of like funny C shape on each side. There's a C and a backwards C. And you're gonna take these two and you're going to put them right sides together. So flip them back so that they're right sides together. The wrong side is out. And you're gonna find that C shape again. So pin it together at the shoulder. And then the underarm. And all around that C shape. Okay, so I'm going to do that on both sides. There's the C right there. What I'm going to do next is take this over to the machine and stitch from underarm all the way over to the underarm. And then I am going to grade my seam allowances like I just did, so that the lining is the shorter one and the dress is the longer one. And you're going to pull the bodice right side out. So you're going to reach through the shoulder and pull right side out, and then understitch each side of the underarm as far as you can. So I know that's a lot of steps, but again, it's just like we did on the neckline, and it's just like we did on the picnic top on the underarm. So I want you to get to that point, and then we'll be ready to sew our side seams. So we are going to be sewing around our armholes now. So again, at 5/8 of an inch, just from the raw edge of the underarm. So I've stitched around one entire underarm, and I'm going to grade the seam allowances again so that the lining is the shorter one. And now the dress should be slightly taller. Okay, and then I'm going to clip again into the curves, just around the curviest parts, about every 1/2 inch.
And there is a bit of an outer curve on the sleeve here, so you can just do a few notches here. So just cut little triangles. Just a few is fine. All right, and now I'm going to turn the whole thing right side out. So actually just the side that I did, because I've only done one side so far. So I'm just going to reach through the front, through the shoulder, and I'm going to grab the side on the back, the side that I have already stitched and braided, and pull it through like that. So now I've got a nice finished underarm. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to understitch. So you're going to have to start on each side. You're going to have to do 2 separate lines of understitching on each side. So start on one side at the underarm. Again, you need to have your seam allowances underneath where you're stitching. And just stitch as far as you can. So go as far as you can on this back side, because you're not going to be able to go very far on the front because it's a little skinnier. And the back stitch just as far as I can go. And now I'm going to start stitching again from the other side, meeting up with my previous understitching. And there we go. So my 2 lines of stitching are just meeting. And now same thing that I did with the neckline, I'm just going to press from the inside. Rolling the edges out and getting a nice crisp press right here. All right, after I've pressed this entire underarm, I'm going to do the same thing with the other underarm, stitching all the way around the C shape, braiding, turning right side out, and pressing. And then we'll be back at the table to talk about sewing our side seams. So now you have sewn around your armholes. You've got a nice, neat lined finish there. And the next thing we're going to do is sew our side seams. So what you need to do is on each side, you're going to open out the lining from the dress. So there's the front, and then here's the back on the right side. And I'm going to match those together. So at the underarm, those seams are going to match. So I'll put a pin there. And then here is the waist of the front, my front dart. And then the lining will get sewn together. And so what we're going to do is just sew this from one waistline to the other. So starting here, underarm, all the way to the lining waistline right there. So this is really similar to how you would sew any sleeveless lined bodice. So just like the night and day dress, if you've ever done that, sleeveless. Or like I said, the picnic top is really similar to this. So it's a great skill to have, knowing how to do this type of finish. Okay, so we're coming up to the underarm. And now continuing on to the lining. And then finishing down at the bottom.
All right, so I have sewn this entire side seam, and now I'm going to press these seams open. So it's nice to have a ham or a seam roll or something that you can put in here like this. So you have a raised surface, and then just press each side open. So there's my lining pressed open on one side. And then the bodice side seam pressed open. And then what you'll do is just fold the lining in like this. And then just make sure to press it nice and flat at the underarm. And voila, you have a really lovely, clean finish, fully lined bodice now. So I'm gonna finish pressing the other side, and then we're actually ready to move on to our skirt. So the next thing we'll be talking about is everything I've done to prep my skirt pieces and how to sew the pockets. All right, so now that our bodices are completely lined, we can now focus on the skirt. So what I really want to do is take you on a tour of all the skirt pieces. You have your skirt front, which is what I have here. Again, I've already done my embellishment flat on here from this month's YouTube video. All right, and I'm doing the shaped pocket variation. So the next thing you're going to need is your pocket stay cut in your lining fabric. And there's also a separate piece for interfacing the upper edge of the pocket stay, just to give it some crispness around that shaped opening. You want to make sure that you have those circle marks transferred from the pattern there. All right, and the pocket stay is a great feature that's going to help keep your skirt front nice and smooth and from gaping open when you use your pockets. So you have your pocket stay, and then you also have a pocket for each side of the skirt. Okay, so it has like a hip shape to it. I finished all of my edges, everything pretty much except for the upper waistline on these pieces using my serger. All right, I do want to just note that I did interface my pockets. And the only reason for that was that I ended up interfacing the entire skirt front because of the spider web embellishment needs to have some stability to it. So it just helped to match the weight and drape of the pocket to the skirt itself. So you don't need to interface these, but I did just because I wanted it to match the skirt front, which needed it for the embellishment. All right, so those are the skirt front and pocket pieces. The next thing I want to show you is the skirt back. This is a little unusual the way it's cut out. So this is the upper skirt with the darts, which I've already sewn, and I did interface my center back zipper opening down to the zipper notches. And you should have, this is cut on the fold, okay? So the fold is right here, and there's a line, a stitching line right here for the vent.
So this piece opened out is kind of funny looking. It looks like this. So you have one side of the skirt here and the other side here. The vent is going to get sewn together like this and pressed open to form the kick pleat. So that's why it's cut on the fold like that. So just make sure that you have your stitching line marked for the vent, your dart sewn, and your center back opening stabilized for the zipper down to the zipper notch. All right, so we'll be ready to start sewing the pockets now. I'm gonna put my skirt back to the side, and all you need right now is your skirt front and your pocket stay. So I cut this out of the charmeuse. What you're gonna do is you're going to put these right sides together around these upper edges. All right, so you're going to pin this little short vertical edge here and then the upper edge of that shaped pocket opening. On both sides. So what's going to happen next is that we're going to stitch these together, starting here to your circle mark. You're going to pivot and then stitch around the upper edge, the curved edge of each side. So here, down to the circle mark, pivot, curved edge. And that's it, okay? It's going to stay open here and on the side. So just this little weird sort of L shape here on both sides. All right, so let's go over to the machine. And again, it's really important that you have this marked in. I just feel like it's easier to make that pivot point more consistent from side to side if you mark it in. All right, let's sew our pockets. Well, more accurately, we're sewing our pocket stay to our skirt. All right, so I'm gonna do the right side first, start at that upper edge, and you're sewing at 5/8 of an inch and then back stitching. And this is where you're going to be happy that you have your pivot point marked in, because you'll know exactly where to put your needle down and pivot. And now we're going to stitch this upper edge around that dramatic curve. And backstitch. Okay, so that's really all we're stitching on each side. Doop, doop, like that. And same thing on the other side, except this time I'm starting at the side seam. So going kind of the opposite direction. So, a few things we need to do here. We need to clip right into our pivot points as close as you can to your stitching without clipping your stitching, obviously. So like that on both sides. And then we're going to do some grading. So again, just like we did around the neckline and the armholes, you are going to trim the lining down so it's a little over 1/8 of an inch. And then the skirt itself is a little taller than that, about 1/8 of an inch taller. And same thing on this little vertical edge. That. I'm going to repeat on the other pocket opening. And you can probably guess what I'm going to do next because I have a really extreme curve on this pocket. And you might notice that it's an outer curve. So if you've been paying attention, what do we do on outer curves? We notch them, right? So remember, we clip inner curves and you notch outer curves. So this is definitely an outer curve, and it's going to need some notching in order to be able to lay flat when we turn it right side out. So let me just kind of turn it upside down here. And I am going to do some little cutout notches like this with just the tips of my scissors, about every 1/2 inch, just like that. Okay. And same thing on the other side. Okay. Next thing I'm going to do is turn the stay to the inside of the skirt. So I'm just going to flip it like this. Okay, so that the stay is now on the inside of the skirt. I'm going to kind of open out those nice shaped pocket edges. And then you can probably guess, again, the next thing I'm going to do is understitch. Okay, so I'm going to open out these 2 layers and I'm going to understitch the pocket stay. Again, making sure to get the seam allowances under my stitching. So all the seam allowances are turned this way. So they're getting caught in my stitching. And it's a little tricky to understitch around this curve. So what you have to do is kind of get in there with your fingers like this and just kind of open it up as much as you can so that you get a really nice taut surface there. And then we're coming up to our pivot point here. So it is possible to understitch a pivot point. You just need to stop with your needle down right in the pivot point, lift up your presser foot, and then just kind of pivot. Oops, sorry to keep hitting that GoPro. And then just going to pivot everything away from the needle and the presser foot. So now we're going up the opposite direction. Back stitch. All right, so I'm going to repeat the understitching on the other side. Again, there's my pivot point. And you can see on this side, I have quite a bit of cording and embellishments to deal with, so that's okay. I'm just going to keep holding the curve open as much as possible. It's also a little tricky too because you have another layer down here, right? We're kind of working in between two layers of the skirt. So just make sure that you're only stitching through the layer you want to be stitching through right now and not through the other side of the pocket stay. And there we go. Okay, so both sides are understitched, and now I'm going to press. So hopefully if you've been watching my videos consistently now, you'll notice there's always a pattern to the way that we do things. You know, right after understitching, you're always going to press that edge. Okay, so let's see. I'm actually going to put the ham underneath here so that I can raise it up for you guys to see. I'm just going to kind of smooth that edge. And it's worth really taking the time to press this edge nicely because so much of the design of this skirt is about the curve of that pocket opening. So just take your time here. All right, and make sure that you don't have any little puckers in the corner. That looks good. So I'm going to repeat pressing on the other pocket opening. And I should mention that you can certainly do a full lining for this skirt as well. I'm not going to be showing it in this video just in the interest of time today, but there are instructions for lining your Stanwyck skirt in the instruction booklet. I'm not going to do a full lining. I'm going to wear a slip with mine. So I'm just going to have the pocket stay and no lining. Okay, so once you're happy with your edges, and I actually probably need to spend a little more time right there because I can see a little peak of lavender. Once you're happy, the next thing you're going to do is we're going to go back to the table and put our pocket pieces onto the stay. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is take these pocket pieces, the pocket bag. Okay, so hopefully you should understand now that in order for these to be functioning pockets, we need something to form a bag in here where your phone and your dog treats go. Okay, so you're just going to take this piece, the pocket bag, and lay it on top of the stay. And you can see that the shapes match each other at the bottom here. And what we're gonna do is you're going to pin these two layers together, okay? The pocket stay and the pocket bag. So I'm not pinning the skirt front together, just these two pocket layers. And then around the lower edge, I'm pinning those two layers together. And then they're also going to get pinned together here. There is a notch on the skirt front which tells you exactly where the pocket bag is supposed to end. So you can align those two marks and then get everything kind of smooth here. If it's not laying smoothly, see what's going on. Like so. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side here. Just the layers of the pocket are getting pinned together. I'm going to check my alignment at the top with the notch on the skirt front. And just distribute some more pins here. And what is going to happen next, this was the hardest part to actually write in the instructions, but it's not that hard to understand once you look at it. What we're going to do next is we're going to get in between these layers here, and you're going to stitch around the edge of the pocket bag from here to here. So start at the waist, go around here, pivot, and up the side. And same thing here. So it's just a little awkward because you have to maneuver yourself in between this hole right here because you don't want any of your stitching to go to the outside of the skirt. Okay, so let's go on over to the machine and we'll get started. I'm actually gonna start stitching on this side. So we're gonna plan to start over here, pivot, and stitch around. So I am taking my skirt and I'm isolating just the pocket layers and putting them into the machine. And I'm going to be stitching at 5/8 of an inch. Stitching around the layers of the pocket. So pivot at this corner here. Okay, and now we're getting up to where the pocket stay connects to the other side. So it's a little strange here just because you're not going to be able to look at your seam allowance guide on your machine anymore. So I will tell you, it doesn't really matter if you're right on 5/8 of an inch or not. What matters is you just keep a consistent line of stitching and keep everything nice and smooth here. So this is that sort of awkward place I was talking about. We have this sort of interesting hole right here, and you need to make sure to kind of maneuver this over the free arm of your machine because we're just stitching between two layers. This and just make sure you've isolated the layers you want to stitch through. And then back stitch. See, it's not really so hard. It's just kind of hard to explain in the instructions. So I'm gonna trim that, and then we just have to sew the other side. And on this side, we can start at the top here. You might just need to kind of keep moving your layers around. Get them to a good comfortable place for you to stitch the entire pocket bag. Also do this in 2 lines of stitching if it's more comfortable for you to, instead of keep dealing with all of this excess. If you wanted to just stop stitching and come around from the other side, you can try that too, but it's definitely possible. to do it all in one line of stitching. And then you're just stitching up to where the pockets stay and the skirt meet. And there we go. We should now have functioning pockets. All right, so there we go. Now your skirt side pieces are sewn on and you have actual pocket bags here. Now the final thing we're going to do, well, two final things really. We need to baste some of these open layers together. So at the waist, just pin your pocket stay layers together with your skirt front, like this. And then do a line of machine basting just so those layers stay in place. And then same thing on the side seams where you have all these layers right here. Just get them nice and flat and flush with each other. And again, pin these in place. And we're going to baste these together, the side seams as well, so that then everything stays nice and flat when we are constructing the rest of the skirt. So when I do machine basting, I just go up to a 5 stitch length. And I'm just going to start at the upper edge of the pocket, and I use a 1/2 inch seam allowance so that my basting stitches get hidden in the seam allowance. Same thing on the other side seam. Baste those pocket layers in place. And finally at the waist. And there we go. So that is our skirt front, fully constructed. And you can see you have these awesome pockets which are held together with the pocket stay. So even when you put your iPhone in here, put your hands in your pockets, because of the stay, everything's going to stay nice and flat on your skirt front. So you have an entirely constructed skirt front unit, and the next thing we'll do is work on the skirt back. Now that the skirt front is totally complete, we're ready to focus on the skirt back. So I'm going to show you how to do the center back seam on the skirt and also how to sew the kick pleat. I really love kick pleats because that means you don't have a slit in the back of your skirt, meaning you can wear a slip like I plan to do with this skirt. And also it means that you're going to get walking ease without having to show all of your legs or pantyhose or whatever. All right, so what we're gonna do is put the skirt back right sides together like this. And remember that I've stabilized with that 1¼ inch wide stay tape or fusible strips, whichever you choose to use, down to the set of double notches, which indicates where the zipper opening ends. So I'm going to pin from the notches down to the top of the kick pleat, which is where it juts out like this. And you should have some marks here to guide you. There should be a circle right here, and that's at 5/8 inch. And then you should have a line going down, which indicates where you should baste the kick pleat together. So what happens is the kick pleat gets basted together and pressed, which helps it stay nice and crisp while pressing, and then you remove the basting later. Just like if you see a coat or something in a store and it has some stitching in the back kick pleat, that's why. It's to hold that pleat together until you're ready to wear it. All right, so what you want to do is put some pins through that kick pleat mark line and make sure that the two lines are matching up on both sides of the skirt. And then just continue to pin down. We have a visitor. Mr. Jingles is very hungry. He may jump up here at any minute. Okay, so once you're happy with the line matching on both sides of the skirt, we're going to take this over to the machine, and just to let you know what's going to happen, we're going to start stitching with our usual stitch length up at the notches, and we're going to back stitch there and continue to stitch down into the circle, back stitch there. Henry's being very naughty. Back stitch there, and then we are going to change our stitch length to a basting stitch and stitch down that line for the kick pleat. All right, so let's head on over to the machine. Okay, so I'm at the machine. I'm going to put my skirt back under the presser foot, starting at the double set of notches where the zipper opening ends. I'm going to start stitching. My stitch length is like 2.5. I'm going to back stitch and then continue stitching. Get these threads out of the way. At 5/8 of an inch. Until I get to my circle mark. And then I'm going to back stitch again. And you can go forward again. So that can tend to be a stress point. So if you want to reinforce a little bit there, that's great. And then go to a 5mm stitch length. And now I'm going to continue stitching along the marked basting line. So I didn't need to cut my thread or anything. Just continue on stitching. And the stitching I'm doing now is the stitching that will be removed at the end of construction. Okay, I'm coming to the end, and you are not going to want to back stitch here. This is just temporary stitching. Okay, there we go. All right, so let's talk about pressing this. I think I can get this out of the way. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to open the skirt up. I'm going to get it nice and taut on the surface here. And I'm going to press, okay, so from the notches down, I'm going to press this seam open, just like you normally would a center back seam. And then I'm going to take the kick pleat excess here, the body of the pleat, and I'm going to open it up so that it's centered over the center back seam like this. So kind of dividing that body of the pleat so that half is on one side and half is on the other side of the skirt back. We're going to press this flat. So it's essentially a box pleat. All right. Henry, what's wrong? I think he's just so hungry today. He's currently scratching something, but it's his, oh, lunchtime. So we got Henry this automatic feeder that feeds him a little bit of food every 4 hours rather than giving him 2 big meals, because the vet said that would be better for him. And so now when it goes off, he jumps and goes racing to get his little meal. So now that he's eating, he should be a little quieter for the rest of this project. We'll see. All right, so I'm opening out the box pleat over the center back seam and just pressing it flat like this. Okay, so it just looks like that. And what I would recommend doing now is turning it over with the right side facing up, and just make sure that your seam looks nice and pressed open flat from the right side. You can give it a little spin there. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is to stitch down the box pleat, because you probably noticed it's kind of hanging out nice and free here, and we don't want that. We want it to be secure at the top. So what we're going to do, and I'm going to show you this here so you can see kind of close. What we're going to do is, from the right side of the skirt, you want to find the top of where the box pleat ends. I can feel it through there. And then we're basically going to do an inverted V shape. We're going to stitch from the center of the seam down to the edge of the box pleat over here, and then same thing from here to here. So there's going to be a little upside down V of stitching that will hold the box pleat in place. So what I would recommend doing is, and you can kind of do this just by eye, kind of find the edge of the box pleat here. I can feel it with my finger, and you can probably see a little ridge through the fabric right now. I can feel it with my finger right here, and find that same point on both sides. And it can just be like 1.5 inches down. Again, you can just kind of like eyeball it. And I'm going to show you a little trick now for keeping your stitching really even. And I have to credit Threads Magazine for teaching me this trick, and I really like this one. What you're going to do is you're going to pull out the upper thread from your machine so that you have a line of thread coming towards you like this. All right, and now we're going to anchor the needle in the center of the back seam. And you can take that pin out now. And you're going to use this thread, the upper thread, as a guide. So pull it diagonally towards the pin where you want the stitching to end, the edge of the box pleat. And you're going to use that as a guide. So you don't have to mark anything in here. Oops, and don't be like me. Don't forget to turn your stitching back to 2.5 rather than your long basting stitch here, because this is a permanent stitch. You're going to back stitch. And then you're going to follow that line. Hopefully you can see it. I know we got a lot of pink on pink happening right now. But you're going to follow this line of thread as your guide to help you stitch a nice straight line here. And then when you get to the edge of the box pleat underneath, you're going to back stitch. All right. So that's one side. We're going to do the same thing on the other side of the kick pleat. You can just trim all those threads down now. So again, we're going to be starting, so there's one side of that inverted V. Again, we're going to be starting at the center back seam. You are going to grab your upper thread and pull it out of the machine. You can put it underneath your presser foot. You're going to anchor your needle right in the middle of the center back seam. Put your presser foot down. Use this upper thread as your guide to stitch right to the edge of the box pleat underneath. Back stitch. And I'm just following that upper thread as a temporary stitching guide. All right. So now you can trim away any excess thread there. You can trim away that upper thread that you just used. It got caught a little under my stitching, which is fine. I'll just trim it now. Trim away the thread at the back. All right, so what we have here is a really beautiful, evenly stitched kick pleat. Oh. And the next thing we're gonna do is stitch our skirt side seams. So I am going to leave you on your own for that. What you're gonna do is you're gonna put your skirt front and your skirt back, right sides together, and you're going to stitch the outer side seam at 5/8 of an inch and press those seams open. You're gonna have a lot of bulk at the upper front side seam because of the pockets, and just press everything open. So I have completely sewn my skirt now. I have the side seams sewn, and we're ready to put the skirt together with the bodice. So you're gonna lay your skirt out and then take your bodice, and you're gonna put them right sides together at the waistline seam and pin. So what you're gonna do is you're going to flip this upside down, the bodice, and then you're gonna take the lining and just open it out, just completely get it out of the way because you don't want it to get caught in any of this pinning. All right, and if you lined your skirt, like I said, I'm not covering that today, but if you did line your skirt, you would have basted it together. So your skirt lining would be inside your skirt, and you're gonna wanna leave a couple inches open at the back here where they are not, the two layers aren't basted together. But all of those instructions are in. You can follow the night and day instructions, or you could follow my Lemoire dress video to see how to deal with a fully lined dress. Okay, so we are going to take, what I like to do is match all of my match points and then distribute any ease. So by that, I mean you could start with your front waist darts, match them to the pocket seams. So if you've ever wondered why some bodices and skirts are interchangeable and some are not, here is a great example of why. Because on the Stanwyck bodice, we need to have the darts exactly match those pocket seams for it to be aesthetically pleasing. So all of the seams have to be placed exactly just so, the darts and the seams, so that everything lines up really beautifully, and also that the bodice and the skirt have the same exact amount of ease. All right, so I just pinned 2 match points and then distributed pins in between. So again, side seams, bodice side seam, skirt side seam. I'm gonna match those together. I like to put a pin right in the center there. Make sure that the side seam is matching on the right sides. And then again, you can distribute the ease between those 2 points. A really common mistake I see people doing is to start at the back and just keep pinning all the way around, and then not understand why they seem to have more on their skirt or more on their bodice and they're not matching. Again, you just have to match those match points, distribute in between. So on the skirt back, I'm going to match the center backs. I'm going to match my back waist bodice, back bodice waist dart to the inner dart on the skirt. So those 2 darts are going to match. And because there are 2 darts on the skirt back, there's going to be 1 dart here that doesn't match anything, and that's fine. You're just going to again distribute that ease. And just continue on the other side until everything is pinned and distributed. And you can probably guess that the next step is going to be to stitch all these layers together around the waistline seam. This is a simple little line of stitching. You just want to make sure that all of your darts stay pressed in the direction you want them to stay pressed in, and that your seam allowances on the side seams stay pressed open. So just watch out for that while you're stitching. But other than that, all you're doing is stitching at 5/8 of an inch. And then you can grade your seam allowances so that the skirt is the shorter one and the bodice is the longer one, and press them up towards the bodice. And then we're gonna be ready to put our zippers in. Okay, so we are finally ready to sew in our zippers. So I'm gonna be using my regular lapped zipper method that I know and love so well. I've taught it before on my Lemoire class and also on the Stanwyck skirt video. and I'm excited to show it to you today in a dress. So what we have here, I have already turned in the seam allowances, the amount they need to be. So on the right side, which if you remember all the way back to when we did our clean finish at the neckline, the right side gets turned in the same amount as the neckline all the way down, which is 1/2 inch. So you're gonna press in this seam allowance all the way down to where it opens at the double notch down here. Okay, so that means there's going to be just like the tiniest little 1/8 of an inch underlap down here, because the seam allowance from the notches down is your usual 5/8 of an inch. Okay, and then on the left side, we have turned in the seam allowances the full 5/8 of an inch all the way down. Okay, so go to your iron, press those in, and now you're all prepped and ready to insert your zipper. So you're going to be using a regular standard zipper, not invisible. And this one is 24 inches. You're going to need at least 22 inches for this dress is ideal, okay? So what we're going to do in this method, I always pin flat, pin one side flat, go to the sewing machine and sew it, come back to a flat surface, pin the other side flat, and then finally sew that side of the sewing machine. Okay, so the first step is to pin the zipper to the underlap side, which again is the right side. So you're going to take your zipper and you're going to look for where it sort of naturally folds under at the top of the tape. It should be a little higher than the metal stop. So right where that point is, I want you to position that at the dress's neckline. And then you're going to just let the tape release up like that. And what we're gonna do is you're gonna take the dress's seam allowance only. Make sure that the lining is totally free and not caught in your stitching here. You are going to take the dress's seam allowance and position it so that the fold is just next to the zipper's teeth, okay? You don't want it to be on top of the teeth at all, and you also don't want there to be a gap between the zipper's teeth and the fold of your dress. Okay, so we're gonna start at the top. I put my pins in like this with the head of the pin towards me. It just makes it easier as you're sewing to pull those pins out because the head will be closer to you. All right, so just place pins like this all the way down. And we don't have to worry about matching anything yet. When we come back and pin the other side, we'll match our waistline seam. But for now, just pin from top to bottom. And my zipper is 24 inches, so I'm gonna have a little bit of a tail here. You can shorten that. You can do a zigzag stitch over your teeth and then trim with pinking shears. I'm just gonna tuck it in. Okay, so when I get to where the seam line closes here, that set of double notches, I'm gonna make sure to pin well here. And that's it. So all I've done is pin from top to bottom. And remember, I've kept my lining free. So just double check. I have some fuzz caught in there. Double check that your lining is completely free. And you're good to go. So we're gonna go over to the sewing machine. I'm gonna put a zipper foot on my machine. And then we're gonna sew right on this fold right here. Okay, so we are ready to sew the underlap side of the zipper at the machine. So I'm going to open up the zipper about halfway, it doesn't really matter, but just enough to get the zipper pull out of the way so that we can sew here. And again, just reminding you to keep your lining free of your stitching. And also the top of this tape can be up and out of the way. You don't need to have it folded under. Okay, so I have put a zipper foot onto my machine. For my Bernina, that's the number 14 foot, and it just means on this style of foot, I have to switch my needle over to the side of the foot closest to the zipper teeth, okay? So you may have a different style of zipper foot, so however you need to position it or the needle so that you can stitch closer to the teeth is what you need to do. And you are going to lower your needle so it's going right into the fold of the fabric. So I'm about a 1/16 of an inch away from the edge of the fold. And we're going to start stitching, and it always helps to just kind of grab from behind a little bit. Start stitching, and then use your left hand to just kind of guide the fabric through. Keep everything nice and flat. So just a reminder that the only layers I'm stitching through here are the dress, the seam allowance underneath it, and then the zipper tape. Really important to just keep a nice smooth surface as you're stitching a lap zipper. So what I always recommend is holding from one hand behind and one hand in the front to keep this surface here as wrinkle-free as possible. And that's what will help you prevent having any weird little tucks or buckles in your stitching. Take out your pins as you go. And just keep kind of moving your dress up. Now you'll see that I am getting close to the pull here. So I'm going to stop with my needle down, lift up my presser foot, and then close the zipper again so that the pull is out of the way. And again, just kind of periodically smooth this out. And just take out your pins as you come to them. And I'm coming up to the waistline seam here. Almost at the bottom here. And then I am going to backstitch. And there we go. So that's it. The underlap side is completely sewn. So you can see there's my line of stitching right there, just very close to the fold. And the next thing we're going to do is go get a nice flat surface again. You may be tempted to do this next step on your lap, but just don't do it because you want to keep everything as flat as possible. So you want a nice flat surface to pin the overlap side on. So let's go back over to this table. Pinning the overlap side of the zipper. All right, time to pin the overlap side. I have it nice and smooth on my flat surface. The way that I like to do this is to pin at the waist and then pin down to where the seam line opens, and then match at the neckline and pin down to the waist. So again, this is just a concept of pinning your match points and then distributing any ease between the match points. So let's start with that waistline match point. I'm going to take the seam allowance on my overlap side, and again, make sure that your lining is totally free here. So I just have the dress itself. Take that seam allowance and take it over the zipper teeth, and you're going to place it here so that it just covers the line of stitching that you just did on the underlap side. And now you need to have your left hand between the layers so that you can now pin in place to the left of the zipper teeth. So what you're looking for is that you've now pinned this little flap in place here. All right, and it's a common mistake to accidentally pin on this side to the right of the zipper teeth. So if you can't open your zipper at any point in this process, then you have pinned in the wrong place, okay? So just make sure that your pin is to the left of the teeth. It's going through your seam allowances and through the left side of the zipper tape below. All right, so now that I've matched my waistline seam, I'm going to continue to place pins from the waistline down. And it's a little awkward to do this just because you have to maneuver your left hand between the layers so that you don't accidentally pin through to the right side of your dress, or the front of your dress. So again, just making sure that this flap is just barely covering the stitching you just did on the underlap. And now this is where that seam line opens up. So what I'm going to do is put a pin horizontally at the bottom so I know where to stop stitching. When you do a lap zipper on this side, we're going to do an L shape. So we're going to stitch down here, we're going to pivot at the horizontal pin and then stitch horizontally over the zipper tape at the bottom. All right, so now we're going to go back up to the top. Our second match point is the neckline. So I'm going to flip the pull down. And this is the trickiest part, I think, of a lap zipper because you have a lot of bulk up here with the pull. So the seam allowance should just be covering the pull, and then you're going to pin to the left of it. And it does get quite bulky, but just make sure that you're securely pinned there and that you don't have any seam allowances popping out underneath. So the one downside of a lap zipper, I feel like, is that you are always able to just see the pull a little bit at the top. I would say don't stress out about it too much. It still has a really great vintage look, and a lap zipper is a great secure zipper for a snug fitting dress like this. So now we are going to distribute between the neckline and the waistline. And your two sides should be matching up so you don't see any bubbling or buckling or anything like that. But if you do need to distribute a little bit, now's the time to do it. And just like we did at the bottom of the skirt, we're just maneuvering the left hand between the layers so that my pins are only going through the seam allowances and the zipper tape below and pinning to the left of the teeth. And there we go. So I've pinned the entire thing. If you want to test yourself, make sure that you can open the zipper all the way. All right, and that's what we want to see. And if you open this up, you should see your pins here, and your zipper should be just a slight distance in from the fold here. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is go back to the machine and stitch this side, top stitching at 3/8 of an inch all the way down until we get to our horizontal pin, which is where we're going to pivot and stitch horizontally over the base of the zipper.
All right, now it's time to sew the overlap side of the zipper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my needle to the other side of my zipper foot because now we're stitching on the other side of the zipper teeth. If you have one of those feet where you have to move the foot to either side, obviously now is the time to move your foot to the other side because we're stitching on the opposite side. Always want to stitch from the top to the bottom on both sides. Okay, so I'm going to grab my lining, make sure that it's free. The top of my zipper tape is out of the way, and I am going to be top stitching here at 3/8 of an inch. So I know that this line is what I want to be aligning the fold of my fabric with. I'm going to lower my needle, and you just want to be really careful here to make sure that you don't stitch through anything metal because that will break your needle. And this side it's not harder than the other side, but it will be the side where your stitching shows, so the world can see your stitching. So I'm not telling you that to psych you out. I'm just telling you so that you know it's important to take your time and keep your stitching nice and straight. Okay, I'm going to start stitching
gonna back stitch here. Take your pins out as you go. And again, we just want to hold everything nice and smooth here. I probably should have mentioned that my zipper is all the way open this time. Okay, so the pull is all the way as far down to the bottom as it can go. And this waistline point is really important because we want to make sure that it matches the other side of the waistline. So take your pin out just as late as you can in the process. Okay, and I'm going to keep kind of moving the dress up so that the weight doesn't like pull it down and give you any folds on the surface here. Again, we just want to keep everything really, really smooth. Okay, so you can see here that I'm getting really close to my pull, which is all the way down at the bottom, completely open. You're going to stitch as far as you can until it gets a little uncomfortably close to the pull. And I'm going to stop with my needle down, lift up my presser foot, and close the pull. And now I can finish off my stitching. So obviously I no longer have my guide to go by, so I'm just kind of checking the back of my presser foot and seeing that it's aligned with my stitching that I just did. And I'm just going to kind of eyeball it from here until I get to my horizontal pin. I'm going to stop with my needle down, and then I'm going to pivot 90 degrees, and I'm just going to stitch horizontally over the base of the zipper. Now, obviously, you want to make sure there's no metal parts underneath there. I know that my metal stop is a little bit longer here because remember we talked about the zipper being a little too long. But you want to be, if your zipper is shorter, you want to be really careful that you're not going to stitch over your metal stop there. All right, so there we go. That is the overlap side stitched in, and our zipper is completely done now. So you will want to test it right now. Make sure that you're able to completely close it and that it looks, that your stitching looks really nice and uniform. And just check your pull at the top. Obviously, your zipper should probably blend in a little better than mine. I used a light pink one on mine just so that you guys could see the contrast. But if you had a better match on your zipper, then the pull wouldn't be able to show at all. All right, so that's your zipper. We're going to go back over to the table and talk about the finishing things like stitching in your bodice lining by hand and then doing the hem, and then your dress is done. Now that your zipper is in, you can do the finishing inside the bodice. So what I like to do is on the bodice lining, I stitch at 5/8 of an inch just to give myself a guide stitch to press it to the wrong side, that seam allowance. And I do also do a couple little snips throughout the waistline seam just because this is curved. It's a curved shape and it helps it roll up nicer. And then what you're going to do is pin around the waistline. You're going to want to pin so that this fold just covers your waistline seam. So continue to do that all the way around the waistline. And then you're going to hand stitch this in place. You can use a slip stitch, kind of getting in between the layers right there, just to make your stitching as invisible as possible. And then you also need to turn in the seam allowances at the zipper. So what you're gonna do here is just fold this in so that it lays flat. And then you'll be pinning that fold to the zipper tape. So this is where all of that work with the clean finish at the top is going to pay off, because you're going to turn in the top of your zipper tape there, and then you can fold in the lining. And as you can see, you have a nice sort of 3 layers of the bodice lining, the zipper, and then the bodice itself, rather than these 2 layers of the dress being right on top of each other and making it really hard to get a clean finish there. So that's gonna look really beautiful. Okay, so pin all the way down there, pin all the way down on the other side of the zipper tape. So again, just fold in the upper edge. And then here, because this is the underlap side, you won't have any fabric, dress fabric on the other side of the zipper tape. You'll just need to hand stitch your bodice lining close to the zipper teeth here. Okay, so that is the stitching for the bodice lining. The last thing to do is to hem your dress. So I do want to just show you the vent situation. So I took my basting out of the kick pleat back here. So this is open now. And now you'll be able to finish the lower edge of the dress however you want. I did serging. This is a good time to try on your dress and see if you like the length. I tend to draft my skirts fairly long because I like my pencil skirts to be a couple inches below the knee, which is a more vintage look and it's not for everyone. So I understand that you may want to try it on now and see if you want to take some off the bottom there. And then at this point, you're going to fold up your hem allowance and hand stitch as invisibly as possible. Use a catch stitch or a slip stitch. And your seam allowance, your hem allowance on here, I like to keep it 1 inch or less on this shaped pencil skirt because I feel like that helps you get the smoothest hem with the taper that you have on the side seams. So you're gonna do all that hand stitching, finish your bodice stitching, do your hem, and then your dress is finished.
All right, I hope you have loved learning how to make the Stanwyck dress this month. And don't forget to check out YouTube and take advantage of this spiderweb embellishment tutorial to make a striking, spooky version of the Stanwyck dress. And also remember that we have another extra for you this month here on Patreon, which is the removable collar to go with this bodice. So it's a Wednesday Addams inspired little shirt collar and it looks really great with this dress. It's a great sheath dress for fall, and adding that collar gives you even more possibilities for your wardrobe. So thanks again for watching. I hope you've loved this month. Thank you all for being patrons. And I will see you next time. Happy Halloween. Goodbye.